The year was 1943, and Europe seemed swallowed by a shadow that would not lift. The war had been raging for years, and each village caught in its path became nothing more than a whisper, a story muttered by survivors who fled under cover of night. In the eastern stretches of occupied Poland, a small town named Brzezinny had managed to survive quietly, clinging to life as if holding its breath. But the silence was deceptive. Behind shuttered windows, eyes lingered on the horizon, waiting for the sound of trucks, boots, or worse, the dreadful hum of engines that carried soldiers deeper into the countryside. The war had taught the people that quietness was never safety, it was merely the pause before something unspeakable arrived. On a gray, rain-soaked evening, the sound finally came. A column of trucks rolled into the village square, their tires splattering mud onto cobblestones slick with water. The villagers gathered at windows, peering through the lace of curtains, praying not to be seen. At the front of the convoy, a black car slid into place, sleek, shining despite the storm, its windows tinted so dark that it seemed to carry shadows within it. When the car door opened, an officer emerged, tall and angular, wearing the insignia of the SS. He adjusted his gloves with a mechanical precision, his face pale and expressionless, as though carved from cold marble. Even before he spoke, a dread fell upon Brzezinny like a thick fog. The officer gave no speech. He merely pointed at a row of houses, and the soldiers behind him went to work. Doors splintered, furniture toppled, and frightened voices rose into the wet night air. Families were dragged into the streets, their possessions tossed aside like refuse. Nobody dared intervene. The villagers who were not chosen remained frozen, praying silently to remain invisible. It was clear that this was not a random patrol, this was an inspection, or worse, a cleansing. But the purpose of their presence was unclear, and that uncertainty burned colder than the rain. One house stood apart from the others, at the edge of the town square. Inside, Eva Kowalska, a schoolteacher, clutched her younger brother close as soldiers banged on doors around her. Her father had left months ago to fight with the resistance, leaving Eva to guard the remnants of her family. As she crouched in the dark, heart hammering, she remembered his words: "If they come, hide in the root cellar. Do not hesitate. Do not make a sound." The banging of a door just 2 houses down jolted her to action. With trembling hands, she led her brother through the kitchen, down the creaking stairs, and into the damp earth below. When the officer's boots finally echoed on the stones outside her door, the cellar was already closed. In the darkness, Eva could hear her brother's rapid breathing and the muted thud of her own heartbeat. The soldiers lingered. For a long moment, she feared the cellar would be discovered. She imagined the wooden hatch being torn open, the light flooding in, the faces leering down. But the boots moved on. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating. Eva dared not exhale too loudly, for she knew the night was only beginning, and the horror that had arrived in Brzezinny was not yet finished. The hours stretched endlessly in the root cellar. The damp earth pressed close on all sides, and the only light came from the faint cracks between the wooden boards overhead. Eva held her brother, Marek, against her chest, feeling the rhythm of his trembling. Every creak above sent fresh waves of fear through her body, but she dared not move. Occasionally, she thought she heard voices, low, clipped German commands punctuated by the distant wailing of neighbors. Then silence again, broken only by the steady drum of rain on the roof. It was in that silence that her mind began to wander, replaying the stories whispered by villagers who had seen other towns visited by the black car. None of those tales ended with survival. By midnight, the storm had faded, leaving a stillness so complete it seemed unnatural. Marek stirred, whispering that he needed water, but Eva pressed her hand gently against his lips. She had noticed something he had not, the muffled sound of boots above them, still present, still waiting. The officer and his men had not left the town. They were inside her house. A floorboard groaned directly overhead. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Her pulse thudded louder than the silence, and she fought the urge to panic. Whoever they were searching carefully, deliberately. The thought gnawed at her: Were they looking for someone specific? Hours bled into one another, and exhaustion tugged at her eyes. But sleep was impossible when every sound could mean discovery. Then, through the boards, she caught a faint whisper, German words exchanged between soldiers. She only understood fragments, list, names, and something about the school. Ava's stomach dropped. She had been the village schoolteacher. If they had come with a list, if they were calling for names connected to education or leadership, then her hiding was not just survival, it was resistance against an execution order. The realization made her chest tighten until breathing felt impossible. Merrick tugged her sleeve and pointed to a corner of the cellar. Ava turned her head and froze. The soil in the corner seemed disturbed, looser than the rest. She knew every inch of this cellar, but she had never noticed this patch. Her father, before leaving, might have dug something there. Crawling quietly, she brushed away the dirt with her hands. Her fingers struck something solid, a tin box, sealed tight. She pulled it out, heart racing, and cracked it open. Inside lay several folded papers, maps, and what looked like coded messages written in her father's handwriting. The realization hit her harder than any blow. Their father had not simply left to fight, he had left them in possession of resistance intelligence. The weight of it was overwhelming. Suddenly, the presence of soldiers in her house felt inevitable, as though the cellar were glowing with secrets too dangerous to remain hidden. If they found her, it would not just be her life and Marek's at risk. The resistance would be compromised, and with it, countless lives. She clutched the papers close, staring into the darkness, and for the first time that night, she understood the true depth of the danger. Survival was no longer just for her family. It was for the entire village, perhaps even beyond. The morning came without birdsong. Brzezinski awoke under the gray hand of occupation, its silence punctuated only by the occasional barked command in German. Smoke curled from chimneys hesitantly, as if even fire dared not make itself known. From the cellar, Ava could hear the muffled shuffle of neighbors being forced into the square. The soldiers were corralling the villagers together, their voices sharp and rhythmic. The black car was still there, gleaming like an unblinking eye in the fog. Ava's heart ached as she pictured familiar faces lined up, trembling under the officer's gaze. Above her, furniture scraped across the wooden floor. The soldiers were not finished with their search. Every corner of her home was being overturned, every drawer ransacked. Merrick pressed against her shoulder, whimpering, but Ava kept a steady hand over his mouth. She had grown up in this house, but now it felt like a trap. Each passing second threatened exposure. Her father's maps and papers weighed heavily in her lap, and she realized they were too dangerous to keep hidden here. If the soldiers discovered them, no excuse could save them. Her father had entrusted her unknowingly with the responsibility of a soldier, but she was only a teacher. How long could she hold out? Meanwhile, outside, the villagers whispered among themselves in hushed terror. Old Mrs. Zielinski claimed she recognized one of the soldiers from another town, one that had vanished months ago. She muttered of deportations, of families dragged away under promises of resettlement. Young men glanced at one another, their fists clenched, but none dared resist openly. Resistance was suicide, they all knew it. Still, their eyes drifted toward the tree line at the edge of town, where rumors whispered of partisans hiding in the forest. Hope, thin and fragile as cobwebs, lingered there. Back in the cellar, the boots overhead paused. Then came a sound that froze the blood in Ava's veins, the officer's voice, calm and deliberate, issuing orders. She didn't understand every word, but one was clear enough: Keller. Cellar. They were coming. Her mind raced, and instinct forced her to act. She stuffed the tin box back into the soil, scraping dirt over it with frantic hands, all while trying not to make a sound. Merrick stared at her, his eyes wide, understanding the danger without words. The cellar hatch above creaked, dust tumbling down. Someone was pulling at the lock. Ava held her brother tighter than ever, her body shaking. In that moment, she knew discovery was inevitable. The soldiers were thorough, methodical, and merciless. Yet, before the hatch could fully open, a shout erupted from the village square, urgent, sharp, demanding attention. The footsteps above shifted, boots stomping away, leaving the hatch unopened. Something had distracted them. But relief did not come. If anything, dread deepened. Whatever had pulled the soldiers away might prove far worse than being discovered in hiding. The shout that saved Ava and Merrick was no accident. Outside, in the village square, a commotion erupted near the line of villagers. A boy, no older than 15, had bolted from the crowd, darting down one of the narrow lanes between houses. His name was Andrei, the son of a carpenter, and his desperation had ignited something reckless in him. Soldiers yelled in German, rifles snapping upward as they tore after him. Villagers gasped, some covering their mouths to smother cries, others turning their faces away. They all knew what would happen to Andrei, but in that moment, his flight was the only thing keeping the soldiers' attention away from the house at the edge of the square. From beneath the floorboards, Ava could hear the chaos clearly, boots slamming against cobblestones, shouts echoing, the metallic snap of a gun being readied. She pressed Merrick closer to her chest, whispering for him not to listen, but her own ears could not shut out the noise. A single gunshot cracked through the air, sharp and final. Silence followed, broken only by the drip of rainwater from rooftops. In that silence, she understood without seeing, Andrei's escape had ended. Her stomach twisted with guilt. His act of defiance had spared her, for the moment, but at the price of his young life. The officer's voice soon followed, calm and precise, carrying across the square. Though Ava couldn't make out every word, the tone was unmistakable, controlled fury. He ordered the villagers lined up again, his commands punctuated by the occasional crack of a soldier's rifle butt against the ground. Ava imagined his pale, expressionless face scanning each person, measuring loyalty, sniffing out weakness. The villagers stood still, shoulders hunched, trying to disappear into the fog. Children whimpered, but mothers hushed them quickly, terrified of attracting notice. Meanwhile, the soldiers returned to their methodical work. Though interrupted, their search had not ended. Doors still crashed open, furniture toppled, drawers emptied. The square filled with piles of discarded belongings, clothing, photographs, and keepsakes that would never be returned. The message was clear. This was no ordinary patrol. They weren't just taking inventory or enforcing order, they were looking for something, or someone, specific. And as Ava sat hidden, dirt still beneath her fingernails from covering her father's maps, the realization sharpened like a knife. Whatever they sought might be buried only inches away from where she now crouched. Above her, the hatch creaked again. A soldier had returned. This time, the hinges groaned louder, wood straining as it was pulled upward. Dust fell in thin streams, catching in her throat. Ava clutched Marek's hand, her heart pounding so hard she feared the soldier might hear it through the floorboards. The hatch rose, just enough for a beam of pale daylight to pierce the cellar's darkness. The hinges squealed as the cellar hatch lifted further, and for a breathless instant, Ava could see the silhouette of a helmeted head leaning in. A soldier's shadow stretched across the dirt floor, his outline framed by the pale gray of daylight above. Merrick whimpered, too soft for words, and Ava tightened her grip on his hand so hard she feared she might hurt him. The soldier paused, as though listening. Dust sifted downward in lazy trails, clinging to their hair and faces. The air was suffocating, thick with fear and damp earth. Boots scuffed above. The soldier muttered something, too low for Ava to catch, and then another voice answered sharply from the square. More orders, more impatience. The soldier hesitated, his hand still resting on the hatch. For a terrible moment, Ava thought he would climb down, lantern in hand, exposing every secret the cellar held. But instead, he dropped the hatch back into place with a heavy thud, the sound reverberating like a gunshot in the cramped darkness. The latch clicked. Locked, relief threatened to overwhelm her, but it was a hollow kind of mercy. The soldiers were not finished, they were simply being pulled elsewhere. The officer had begun questioning villagers again, dragging them forward one by one. From beneath the floorboards, muffled voices carried down, sharp questions asked in German, followed by sobbing responses in Polish. Ava's stomach clenched when she recognized one of the voices. It was Mrs. Zielinski, the old woman who knew too much, who whispered about disappearances and deportations. If she mentioned the resistance, or her father, the cellar would not save them. Time moved strangely, each second stretching longer than the last. Ava could hear Marek's shallow breathing, could feel the weight of the tin box beneath the soil like a heartbeat. Her mind ran in circles. Should she stay hidden and risk being discovered later, or act now before the soldiers decided to tear the house apart completely? She imagined her father in the forest, fighting with men who carried only rifles and hope, while here she was, paralyzed in the dark with secrets that might cost lives if mishandled. The cellar walls seemed to close tighter around her, pressing in with the weight of expectation. Then, suddenly, a scream shattered the air above. It was high-pitched, terrified, and abruptly cut short. The village square fell silent afterward, as if the entire town had been slapped into submission. Even from below, Ava felt the chill settle over the air. The officer was no longer simply searching, he was reminding them all of his power. And in that reminder, Ava understood with a sickening clarity, it was only a matter of time before her name was spoken, and the hatch above would open again, this time without hesitation. The silence after the scream was unbearable. Even from the cellar, Ava could feel the fear hanging heavy in the square. Then came the officer's voice again, steady, deliberate, a viper uncoiling. Villagers were being dragged forward one by one, questioned in harsh tones. Ava pressed her ear to the boards, straining to catch words. At first it was scattered, names, denials, cries. But then she heard something that made her blood turn cold. Schoolteacher, a villager muttered. Too soft to be confident, but loud enough to be heard. The officer repeated it, testing the word like a blade across his tongue. Lehrerin. Teacher. The murmurs grew louder. Someone had spoken her name, or at least her role, and now it was out in the open. Ava's heart crashed in her chest. She pulled Marek closer, her mind racing. Who had betrayed her? Old Mrs. Zielinski? Someone else who had noticed her father's disappearances, her quiet questions, the way she lingered near the edge of the forest? Whoever it was, the damage was done. The hatch above rattled. Soldiers were returning, their boots moving directly over her head. This time, there was no hesitation. The latch scraped, the wood groaned, and pale light spilled into the cellar. A soldier dropped to one knee, a pistol strapped to his side, his face unreadable in the light. Ava's breath caught in her throat as his eyes swept the cellar. They landed on her almost immediately. There was no time to dart deeper into shadow. Marek gasped, clutching her hand tighter. The soldier shouted an order, and another set of boots approached. Panic surged through Ava like fire. Her mind screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. Then her hand brushed against the loosened earth where the tin box lay buried. For an instant, everything aligned, the soldiers' voices above, the hidden papers beneath her fingertips, her brother's terrified eyes. She understood what her father had meant when he entrusted her with silence. Some things were worth more than life. Her body trembled as she pulled Marek against her, shielding him as if her arms could block bullets. The soldier above lowered a lantern, its harsh light flooding the cellar. Dust and damp walls glowed under its glow, revealing every shadow. The moment of concealment was over. The officer's pale face appeared above the hatch, watching like a predator at the mouth of a burrow. He said nothing at first, only stared down at her, eyes hollow and calculating. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost polite, yet more terrifying than any shout. Kommen Sie herauf. Come up. Ava's legs refused to move. The officer's command still echoed in her ears, but her body clung to the shadows, every instinct screaming to remain hidden. Marek buried his face against her arm, trembling uncontrollably. The soldier at the hatch barked another order, sharper this time, and swung his pistol toward the cellar floor. The message was clear: come willingly, or be dragged out. With a breath that rattled like broken glass, Ava rose to her knees and pulled Merrick up with her. The climb felt endless. Each rung of the wooden ladder creaked under her weight, her hands slick with sweat and dirt. Merrick stumbled behind her, his small hands clutching her dress. When she finally emerged into the daylight, the square opened before her in a vision of dread. Villagers stood in stiff rows, their faces pale, eyes lowered. Soldiers ringed them, rifles at the ready. And at the center, framed by the sleek black car, the officer waited. His pale eyes locked onto hers, and she felt stripped bare, as though he could see not only her fear but also the secrets buried beneath her floor. Merrick climbed out after her, clinging to her side. A soldier shoved them forward, forcing them to stumble into the square. The villagers' gazes flickered upward just long enough for recognition, Ava, the schoolteacher, before dropping again to the mud. None dared intervene, though Ava saw guilt flicker in more than one pair of eyes. Whoever had spoken her name was among them, hiding in the crowd, safe for now under the officer's shadow. That betrayal cut deeper than any weapon. The officer stepped closer, his boots polished so clean they reflected the gray sky above. He regarded Ava with detached curiosity, as though she were an insect pinned under glass. Then, in crisp German, he addressed her directly. She caught only fragments: school, names, resistance. When she faltered, shaking her head, he gestured sharply, and a soldier translated into halting Polish, "You are teacher. You know names. Resistance hides in forest. Tell us." The weight of the demand pressed down on her chest until breathing was nearly impossible. She glanced at Merrick, whose wide eyes begged her not to speak. When she said nothing, the officer's lips curled into the faintest shadow of a smile. He raised his gloved hand, and a soldier yanked Merrick roughly from her side, dragging him forward. Ava screamed, reaching for him, but the butt of a rifle struck her across the shoulder, forcing her to the ground. Mud splashed her face, the taste of iron in her mouth. Through the blur of pain, she saw Merrick crying out for her, his small hands clawing at the soldier's grip. The officer spoke again, calmly, almost conversationally, "The boy first. Then we see how much you can stay silent." The officer's words hung in the air like a blade. The boy first. The villagers flinched, some turning their faces away, unable to bear what might follow. Marek's cries cut through the fog, high-pitched and desperate. Ava staggered to her knees, clutching her shoulder where the rifle had struck her. Pain radiated down her arm, but her eyes were locked on her brother. She could not, would not, let them harm him. Her father's words echoed in her head: silence can protect many, but sometimes silence kills. The soldier holding Merrick tightened his grip, dragging the boy toward the car. Merrick kicked and twisted, his small boots splashing in the mud, but he was powerless against the brute strength of the uniformed man. Ava lurched forward, only to feel the barrel of a rifle press against her ribs, halting her with cold steel. The officer raised his hand, signaling for stillness. His pale face betrayed no emotion, but in his eyes lingered amusement, a cruel satisfaction in watching her wrestle between betrayal and sacrifice. Her lips trembled. She could give them names. She could claim ignorance. She could beg. But every option spiraled toward death: hers, Marek's, the villagers, the resistance fighters hidden in the forest. She thought of her father, crouched in the dark woods, depending on her silence. She thought of the tin box buried beneath the soil, maps inked with desperate hope. And she thought of Marek's hand slipping from hers forever. Tears stung her eyes, but her chest filled with something fierce, stronger than the fear, defiance, when the officer stepped closer, repeating the demand through his translator: names. Tell us. Ava rose shakily to her feet. Mud streaked her face, but her voice, though soft, was steady. "I have no names," she said in Polish. The soldier translated, and the officer tilted his head. His smile thinned. "Lies," he said coldly in German. He motioned again, and Merrick was dragged forward, his cries intensifying. But before the soldier could move further, a sound broke through the tense square, the sharp crack of gunfire, not from the Germans, but from the edge of the forest. Chaos erupted instantly. A bullet whined past, striking the mud near the officer's boots. Soldiers shouted, breaking formation, some spinning toward the tree line. Villagers gasped, some ducking, others frozen in shock. Merrick slipped in the confusion, falling hard into the mud but momentarily free from the soldier's grip. Ava's heart surged, someone had come. The resistance was here. Gunfire ripped across the square, sharp and violent. Villagers screamed, scattering instinctively though soldiers barked orders to hold them still. The officer spun, his pale face lit briefly by a muzzle flash. His calm facade cracked, replaced with cold fury. He shouted for his men to return fire toward the forest, but the resistance fighters were ghosts in the mist, their shots striking from unseen positions. Bullets chipped stone, shattered windows, and struck men down where they stood. The air filled with smoke and screams, the orderly square collapsing into madness. Ava seized her chance. While soldiers scrambled to form a line, she lunged forward, shoving past the rifle at her ribs. She crashed into the mud beside Merrick, wrapping her arms around him. His face was streaked with tears and dirt, but alive, still alive. A soldier turned, snarling, rifle raising toward her. But before he could fire, another shot cracked from the tree line, striking him square in the chest. He dropped instantly, blood darkening his uniform. Ava froze, stunned, then realized the shot had been meant to protect her. Someone out there knew who she was. The officer, however, had not lost control. Even in the chaos, his voice cut through like a whip. He barked orders, and soldiers surged to herd villagers toward the black car, using them as shields against the hidden resistance. A child cried as her mother was dragged forward. Another man fell to the ground, struck across the jaw with a rifle butt. The square was no longer a gathering but a trap. Civilians pressed between the ruthless order of the Germans and the unseen fire of the partisans. Ava held Merrick close, her heart pounding. They could not remain in the open. She scanned desperately for cover, spotting the wreckage of a broken cart near the side of the square. She pulled Merrick toward it, mud splashing around them as bullets hissed past. They slid behind the cart's shattered boards, breathless. From this vantage, she saw the officer clearly, standing calm amid the storm, his eyes narrowing as if calculating not just the resistance's fire, but her every movement. His pale gaze fixed on her, even as his men fired blindly into the FOGEIN. That instant, Ava understood, this was no longer just survival. The officer had marked her. Whether she spoke or remained silent, whether she ran or stayed, he would not leave Brzezinski without her. And as the firefight raged on, she realized the final choice was coming, between escape and capture, between silence and sacrifice. The resistance had bought them a moment, but only she could decide how it would end. The firefight raged as smoke curled upward, choking the morning air. The broken cart shielded Ava and Merrick for a few breaths, but the officer's voice cut through the chaos once more, colder than the gunfire. Soldiers shifted, adjusting their aim, pushing the villagers toward the car. The resistance's bullets struck true, felling men one by one, but the Germans' discipline held. Their line bent, but did not break. If Ava stayed, she and Merrick would be swept into the black car, bound for the same fate as those whispered about villages that vanished into silence. A sharp whistle pierced the fog, 3 short bursts. Ava recognized it instinctively, though she had never heard it before. It was the resistance, signaling retreat or rescue. Then, through the haze, a figure emerged from the tree line. A partisan fighter in a ragged coat, rifle slung across his chest, sprinted toward the square. More shadows followed, flashes of movement darting between houses, closing the distance. The officer shouted, his voice tinged with sudden urgency, and soldiers turned their fire toward the oncoming fighters. For the first time, his control faltered. Ava pulled Merrick to his feet. Now, she whispered, her voice raw but fierce. Together, they ran, slipping from behind the cart and cutting through the confusion. Bullets hissed past, one striking the ground so close mud splashed against her face. Merrick stumbled, but she yanked him forward, refusing to let go. The officer spotted them instantly. His pale eyes narrowed, and his hand lifted. A single gunshot cracked, the sound sharper than all the rest. Pain seared across Ava's side, but she did not stop. She bit down on a cry, forcing her body onward, dragging Merrick toward the tree line where the partisans waited. The forest swallowed them in shadow. Strong hands pulled Merrick from her grasp, hauling him deeper into the safety of the trees. Ava staggered after, clutching her bleeding side, until her legs buckled and she fell against the damp earth. Through the haze of pain, she saw Marek's face, terrified, calling her name, but the partisans carried him onward, their duty clear: protect the boy, protect the future. One of them crouched beside her, pressing a hand to her wound, whispering something she could not hear over the roar of blood in her ears. Her strength drained, but her heart eased. Merrick was safe, back in the square. The officer's fury echoed in shouted commands as his soldiers regrouped. But the forest was vast, and the partisans were shadows he could not catch. His black car gleamed untouched in the fog, a symbol of power that had failed to break the will of a village teacher. Ava's body grew cold, but her last breath carried no fear. She had kept her silence. She had kept her brother alive. And though Brzezinski burned in the days that followed, the forest carried whispers of resistance, of a teacher who defied the Reich, and a boy who lived to remember her courage.